Hello everyone. As requested last night, I will recreate the video that we were working on towards the end of the class. This is what is considered a lower third, and although there are programs that are dedicated to creating graphics for lower thirds, they all usually come with presets, and at some point all presets start looking the same. So it is a good exercise to learn how to create these little graphic snippets so that we have them ready for clients in case they come to us for something that is unique or that is specific to their brand or to their style. So with that in mind, let me go ahead and stop this video playback. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from scratch. The first thing I'm going to look at is sort of what the timing is for this. And we notice that this is running at 25 FPS, if I'm not mistaken. And it's about 6 seconds long. And then we can extrapolate the timing based on what we're looking at as we scrub this video. So that is the original video. I am going to go ahead and import the files that we worked with last night. The first one was called the clip for lower third. I'll go ahead and import that as footage. So straight out as footage, that's just the video. And this video clip will be what we are going to base our composition on. So I'll go ahead and drag that video into the composition icon down here in the project window, and then I'll let go. When I do that, I create a composition that matches the settings of that specific video in size, in ratio of pixels, and the actual FPS and the length of the video. So in this case, the video is 10 seconds long, and if I call up its settings, you'll notice that it grabs the name of the video for the composition name, 1280 by 720, which is the size of the video, 25 FPS, and 10 seconds long. Also notice that the ratio is square pixels. So I'll click OK on that. And then the second thing I did is I brought in the Illustrator file, the title that I gave you, the News 5 logo, as an Illustrator file, as a composition, but I retained the layer sizes. So I'll go ahead and import that as well. And I'll go to look for the Illustrator file, and that is the news5logo.ai. I'll make sure to switch import as to composition retain layer sizes, and then I'll click import. Now what that does is it creates a composition for us called News5Logo, and it imports all of the separate layers into a folder where each one of them will be the size that it was in the Illustrator file. So what we're going to do is we're going to double click that News5Logo composition to open it up. And as I roll over each one of the layers, you'll notice on the composition window up here, you'll notice that each one of the layers retain its own size, so that the outer bounds of each layer is strictly around the artwork. So with that in mind, what we're going to do is we're going to change the settings on this composition to match those of the clip for lower third composition. So if I open up the composition settings for this, 1280 by 720, square pixels, 25 FPS, 10 seconds long. So I'll go to my News5Logo, open its composition settings, and you'll notice that pretty much everything matches. And the reason for that is because when I created this Illustrator file, I went ahead and input all this data in Illustrator. That's part of what I keep on mentioning in classes, pre-production. You have the ability to, when you're setting the canvases in Photoshop or Illustrator, to identify all this data over at the beginning so that you don't have to think about it as you're importing it into After Effects. However, should you make a mistake or just simply neglect to do that, create those settings when you are creating the file in Illustrator or Photoshop, you can always come back into the composition settings in After Effects and make the changes, adjust all the changes to match, and you should be okay. So I'll go ahead and cancel out of this. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start timing the different items as they happen in the video. So as I'm scrubbing the video, it seems like the inner circle starts fading in at around the 0-second mark and starts scaling down. And it's pretty large. So I'll go with what we went last night, which I believe was 2000%. And then I'll go ahead and stop that shrinking of that circle at around 1 second, 14 frames, as you can see. So those are my first two keyframes for both scaling and opacity. So I'll go to the inner circle and I will go ahead and activate both the scaling transformation, and then I'll press Shift and T on the keyboard to call its opacity settings as well. Remember, Shift plus the shortcut will open up several at the same time of the transformation values that you're changing. I will set up keyframe settings for this for scale at the beginning, and the scale value that I will use for the first keyframe was 2000, so I'll set a keyframe and then I'll increase the size to 2000%. That makes it fairly large. And then I also create a keyframe for opacity with a value of 0. It starts as transparent. Then I'll move down to my 1 second 14 frame mark, and I will change the size back down in its scale to 100%, and I will increase the opacity to 100%. So when I scrub that video, that is my animation. You will also notice that this seems to accelerate as the video plays back. Let's take a look at it. It seems to be accelerating as the circle is coming down in size, as it's getting smaller. It seems to be going faster. It starts slow and it goes fast. So I need to create some kind of easy out on both of these keyframes. So as you noticed, I can click and drag a selection. If I click on the gray area, I can click and drag a selection to select both keyframes, and then right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease out, or Control Shift F9 or Command Shift F9 if you're working on a Mac. So what that is going to do is going to create a sort of a deceleration, an acceleration as it starts leaving the keyframe, and that's what I want. So now that I have these settings done for that particular layer, I am going to drag a selection by clicking on the gray area here in one of the transformation values and dragging a selection to select all of the keyframes. You'll notice that as I touch them, as I cover them with that selection, they turn blue. And what that allows me to do is select several keyframes for several transformation values at the same time. So with those keyframes selected, I am going to press Command C or Control C on the PC to copy those files. And then I'm going to go back to the original video and see where the outer circle appears. It happens at around 14 seconds or 13 seconds. That's when it starts happening. So I'll place my time marker at the 13 frame mark. That's where it starts. I'll select the outer circle and I'll paste. Now let me press the U key on the keyboard. U reveals all of the keyframes within a layer. So the U key on the keyboard opens up all of the transformations and any filters that have any keyframes applied onto that layer. You'll notice that first and foremost that the keyframes are offset, and I expected that because where I have my time marker is where I'm pasting that particular set of keyframes. That's the first thing. But if I go back to my video here and I scrub, I'll notice that my outer keyframe actually reaches the inner keyframe, and they both end, the animation for both ends at the same time at around 1:14. So I need to move these two keyframes on my outer circle to match the 1:14 time mark. So I'll place my time marker at 1:14, and then I'll grab these keyframes. I'll drag a selection across them to select both, and I will start dragging them towards the time marker. Now for them to snap, as I am dragging, I will press the Shift key. So I am dragging and then I press Shift and they'll snap to the time marker. Then I'll let go of the mouse, then I'll let go of the Shift key, and everything is as it should be. Now when I play this back, I should get a similar effect as what you see in this video. Now, we know that both of these circles are pretty pixelated. They're very rasterized, and that's because even though they're vector-based files, they came from Illustrator, I haven't activated the continuously rasterize option for those layers. So you find that under the switches. Currently, I am under the modes area. So if you click on this toggle down at the bottom under the switches area, or if you press the F4 key on your keyboard, you will be able to switch between modes and switches. So either click on this little swatch down here, this little button, or you press the F4 key on the keyboard. Now with this open, I'll go ahead and continuously rasterize both the outer circle and the inner circle by pressing on the little switch that's right under that little sun looking like icon. And now you'll see that they got sharp. And when I play back, that looks a lot better. I will also add, I think this has some kind of, it does. You see the little blurriness? That comes from motion blur. So I will also activate motion blur on that inner circle, outer circle, and then activate your motion blur. Once again, you turn on the switch, which is the little swatches that are in this area. So you turn them on, and then you activate from up here. That's where you activate, that's where you enable your motion blur. So if I play it back, it starts to look pretty good. Okay, with that done, what I'm going to do is go back to the News 5 thing, and you'll notice that as the circles come in and they hit, boom, at around the same time at 1:14, I see the channel 5, the number 5 fading in, and it starts from 1:14 and it fades in completely to the 2-second mark. So that's about a 6-frame fade in for the number 5. And at the same time, you get the news channel type rotating and fading in at the same time. The news channel thing it fades in about the same amount of time. So both of them fading at the same amount of time. And then the rotation starts around, let's say 1:14, and it goes 1. So it's one single rotation between 1:14 and around 2:14. So it's one rotation. Boom. It's actually 2 rotations. 1, 2. Yes, it is 2 rotations from 1:14 to 2:14, and they fade in from 1:14 to 2. So let's start with the fade. I'll go ahead and place my time marker at the 1:14 marker, and then I'll select both the news channel and the number 5 layer. And I'll go ahead and press the T on the keyboard, and I'll select keyframes for both. Notice that I only clicked on one of them, and both of them received keyframes. And the reason is because anything that you have selected, if you are changing the transformation that's specific for both of them, in this case opacity, the same transformation that is, then you are allowed to create several keyframes for several layers at the same time. Then I'll move to the 2-second mark, and then I'll click on the little diamond to repeat the keyframes. Now both keyframes right now have a value of 100%. The reason for that is because I want to only change the opacity for the number 5 for now, so that I see that it actually fades, as you see when I scrub the video. There it is. And I need to work with my news channel. This is the thing that I was mentioning last night. If I select my news channel, you'll notice that the anchor point for that is somewhere in between, in the middle of the layer. Let me solo that layer so you guys see what I mean, what I'm talking about. To solo a layer, meaning that you only see that layer without deleting anything else, you use this little swatch down here, the one that's under the dot. If you click on that, then you see that layer only. You'll notice that my anchor point is right in the middle. So if I were to rotate this right now, let me go back to the 1:14 mark and call the rotation value for the news channel. If I do this and set a keyframe there, and we had said that it would take all the way to 2:14 to create 2 rotations, you will notice that the motion will be that of a boomerang. I am not rotating like if I was in a circle. So I need to offset the position of that anchor point. So the way we did that last week was by using the anchor point values, but we know that by changing the anchor point values of that layer, we are moving the content of the layer. I happen to know that those letters are surrounding that imagined imagined circle around the 5. Let me turn everything else back on. So let me turn off the solo action. You'll see the circles. So if I were to move the artwork by, let's say, changing its anchor value point, so let me shift A to call the anchor point, and I'll change the y-axis, you'll notice that it is now my artwork that is moving. And when I rotate it, it's going to rotate right across the circles. So that is not what I want to do. What I want to do is I want to have the ability to move that anchor point roughly to the center of those circles. To do that, let me go ahead and first zoom into that area. And by the way, I am moving this by pressing the space bar. So if you press the space bar, you get the hand tool just like you do in Photoshop. I want to move this anchor point for the news channel somewhere around the center of the circle. For doing that, I will use this tool right here. This is your pan behind tool, which allows you to move your anchor point. So if I click on that, I can go ahead and click on the anchor point. And as I am dragging, I'll press the shift key to constrain to the y-axis. So first click and start dragging, then press shift to constrain, and I'll place it roughly around the center of the circles. Then I'll let go of the mouse, let go of shift, switch your tool back to your arrow tool so that you don't make a mistake of moving other anchor points around. And now when I see the rotation, it's going to rotate around the circle. So that is another way of changing the anchor point position. We had learned how to do this with the anchor point values, but we noticed that it moved the artwork. When we truly need to move just the anchor point, then we use the anchor point tool, the pan behind tool. So let me go ahead and zoom out again. And let's take a look at what we have so far. That's very good. Now I need to go back and change the news channel layer opacity. And so I'll change the first keyframe. I'll go to the beginning of the opacity change, which is at the 114 mark. That's the opacity right there. I'll change the opacity for that keyframe to the value of 0. Remember, the time marker indicates what keyframe you're on. So right now, if I am on top of that keyframe, which I am, and I know that I am because as I roll over, take a look on the left-hand side to the little diamond shapes. If I roll over an area and there's a keyframe there, they'll get activated. So I know now that I am on top of that keyframe. I can go ahead and change its opacity, and the keyframe that I had already set in there will basically, I'm changing the values for that keyframe. Another way to change a keyframe value is to right-click the keyframe or control-click it and say Edit Value, and then you can enter a value into it. So there are several ways of doing it. You don't have to have the time marker on top of the keyframe to change the value of the keyframe. You just need to go to that keyframe, say for example this one, click on that, click Edit Value from the flyout menu, and then you can change the settings for that specific keyframe if you so desire. So now let me go ahead and take a look at this. This looks pretty good, except the news channel looks a little bit too sharp. If I go back to the video, you'll see that it looks blurry here, and that's because I have motion blur applied to that layer. So I'll select that news channel, apply motion blur, and since this switch is activated, it will automatically take. So let's take a look at how this is looking. That looks really good. So with that done, let's go back to the News 5 piece, and the last change on that logo is the pseudo 3D change, which happens between 5 and 6. And it seems like the outer ring is rotating before the inner ring. So between 5 and 524, that's when it's happening. So I'll go to the 5-second mark. And this, as we discussed last night, is basically just a simple horizontal scale for both the outer circle and the inner circle. Let me go ahead and close all of the values for all of these things. So we only see outer circle and inner circle. So I'll call this scaling value for both of those. And we know that this is just a horizontal scale. So starting at the 5-second mark, I will set a new keyframe with the values that it has from the previous keyframe. And to do that, like I told you last night, you click on the little icons to the left. Notice that I have both layers selected. I had scale open for both of them available, so I was able to create keyframes for both with one single click. They both retain the value of the keyframe that was before the keyframe we just created. So this last keyframe here is the same value as this. Basically, I just copied the keyframes. And then I'll go to the 6-second mark. Whoops. Actually, I will go to the 5:15-second mark. And I am going to create a keyframe with a value of, for the outer circle, with a value of, I'm gonna disconnect the two, unlink the two values, and I'm gonna change the value of the scale for the x-axis to 0. So that basically, that squashes it. And then I'll go, not the 515, I mean, I'm working on a 25 FPS, 25 FPS. So I'll go to 513, and I'll move that keyframe to that point. Then I'll go to the 6-second mark, and I'll create a new keyframe with a value of 100 in width. So now that I know that this is basically the motion that I want for this, I will use the exact same set of keyframes. I'll drag a selection and copy them, Control-C or Command-C, and then you'll notice that on the example that we're trying to recreate, the inner circle starts rotating or starts scaling at around 504, but it ends around the same time as the other one. So I'll copy those 3 keyframes, Command-C, then I'll place my time marker at around 504, and then I'll paste. Whoops, I'll select the other layer, sorry, the inner circle, paste, and then I need to modify the last keyframe to match this keyframe. I can also move this one if you want to balance out, and I will show you in class how to balance out everything proportionally. It's not part of this lesson, that's why I'm not showing you that just yet. By the way, this keyframe then becomes useless to me because these 2 keyframes have the exact same values. So why have the extra keyframe, which increases our rendering time? So let me delete that, and boom. You get basically the playback of the logo that we saw in class. Okay, so with that done, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my clip for lower third, composition, and I'm going to drag the News 5 logo on top of it. And if I play it back, it's rendering, and I should see now my original video was 6 seconds long. So I am going to move my work area endpoint to about 6 seconds so that it only renders that much. Remember, these two, the thick bar at the top determines how much you are actually rendering when you create a preview, a render preview, and that is how long it's going to be rendering, and it's going to show you roughly what you saw in the other video. Okay. Now, the last piece of this I'll leave to you guys. We haven't talked about type just yet, and we'll pick up on that next week. But if you can see what is happening here, you'll notice that that's just basically a squashed version of the water video. So let me import that one, this AB water textures. So if I import that strictly as footage, let me double click it here on the project window, and you'll notice that it opens up in a footage window, just like it would in a video editing on a preview window. It opens up in a footage window here, and you'll notice that it's just a small video file, and if I scrub it, it's just a video file. By the way, this was produced in After Effects. The water is actually not water, it's actually a filter in After Effects. So this thing can be recreated, and what we do is we will just simply stretch that footage to match this. So we will squash it and stretch it sideways, and it will play back as the background for our type. We can do that in our next class. I hope this shows you how this was done.